Goedemiddag iedereen. Ik ben Katrien Darras van Bureau 2 en ARCHI+I. Niet Rita Agneessens, zij is spijtig genoeg moeten vertrekken. Maar ik spreek dus in haar naam en ik moest haar excuseren. Ze vond het heel jammer dat ze niet kon blijven. I will continue in English because, as we heard, our next speaker is from London, so he can also understand us. And I will tell you what Bureau 2 and ARCHI+I does. We are a multidisciplinary architectural office with 120 people working off. We have locations in Brussels, Ghent and Roeselare. And now I could give you a large list of the projects we are working on in very different scopes: healthcare, schools, residential. But I think it's more important also to introduce the speaker to tell what is important for us. For us, what is very important when we design a project is the end user. We really build projects for people who are working in it, playing in it, living in it, and then we mean not only the inhabitants, but also the people who has to work in it. And when we look to healthcare environments, that is also the nurses, that is the medical staff, that are the patients, but it's also the family who are visiting. All of them are very important to design an environment where they can, who will be successful for the long term. That's also why Bureau 2 and ARCHI+I is member of groups like Prof, because it's very multidisciplinary and they give us very practical insights that we can use immediately in our design and in the way we conceptualize our buildings. Excuse me, it's very hot here. And so, of course, the end user today is very empowered. This is also the theme of today, and he will be more and more empowered. He can tell what he needs. He can tell what his needs are in a project, in a future building, and we also ask it in the whole trajectory we do when we design buildings. But there are also more and more groups of end users who are voiceless in the sense that they cannot tell what they need, and one of them are people with dementia. More and more we will have people with dementia who are living for a longer time in institutions and in medical environments, and we have to conceptualize environments for them who are also comfortable on a long term, and that's why we want to introduce Niall McLAughlin. He has an architectural office in London, and he worked for a project about dementia. We met him at the Biennale of Venetia, who is an architectural biennale, where he presented an installation on dementia, and now he will tell us about his project. And also he worked with those people with dementia, how they live their environment and the room they are in. I give the floor to Niall McLaughlin.
On the news in London this morning, they said it would be the hottest September day ever. It certainly feels like it. This will be a bit arty and conceptual compared to some of the stuff you've listened to today, but bear with me, it should be fun. As an architect, the first question I have to ask myself is, what is it like not to be me? Because I'm always designing environments for other people who are not me. And I have to ask myself, what's the connection between the things I know about myself and those things which I might not have in common with others, so I can seek to understand them and design spaces for their needs. Right up. Up there, okay? Very good, okay. So, the title of this talk is going to be Losing Myself, because for many years I've been looking at the issue of dementia and trying to wonder what it's like for people with dementia, try to understand what sort of world they're living in and to design for them. About 20 years ago, I was asked by a voluntary organization in Ireland to design their first ever dementia building. And as an architect, they gave me a lovely brief. They said, you know all about buildings and we know all about dementia, so we will educate each other. And when we finish the building, we'll report back to everybody and say what we've done well, but also tell them all the mistakes we've made. And architects are never allowed to confess their mistakes. I thought that was a great idea to begin with. The first thing we were interested in relation to people with dementia was to make a plan of a building that would allow you never to be lost. If you have dementia, it's extremely difficult to lay down recent memories. You might struggle to remember the room you've just been in, and therefore it's extremely difficult to plan the room that you're about to go to. The sense that all of you can sit here and feel generally relatively well, if only a little hot, is because you can remember how you got here and therefore plan how to get out of here. And that's an extremely important part of the function of the human brain. It allows us to use a word to situate ourselves. For people with dementia, they often wander, and looking at the plan of this building, you can see all the routes that somebody might take from the room in the center of the building, where they're in the social center of the building with other people. And however much they try to wander away, the plan of the building always allows them to wander back. So by going out, the plan brings you back again. It's centrifugal and centripetal. And it's that idea that wandering always brings you back to the social center. And it was this idea of what we might call a continuous present tense, being in the world without being able to stretch backwards and forwards in time very easily. And how would you make architecture for that? Many of the issues that we dealt with were extremely important. At Venice, we produced a number of lessons, 16 lessons for people to understand about architecture and dementia. I think the first one has got to do with daylight. For older people, daylight is absolutely essential. It helps to form vitamin D, and the more time they spend outdoors, the better their bone strength and other things will be. In addition, for people with dementia, it helps them to sleep well if they're able to have regular circadian rhythms. The second thing is about the management of the building going when you hand the building over. A key aspect of this building was that the voluntary organization who commissioned it, by the time it was built, it was handed over to professionals. And look at the chairs they put in that room. Anybody who understands older people or anything about dementia will realize that those chairs are hopeless. How would you stand up if you were feeling it was difficult to stand up? And would your head not roll back? And so that sense of architects working before and after the building is complete with the people who manage it was extremely important to us. When the building was finished, we made this drawing to try and talk about a building in a garden that made a kind of a magical world that you could be in. If you were going to be there all day, you could wander around, and the building would be a frame for the garden rather than a thing in itself. And this was an important aspect of what we thought about. And through this drawing, we got work with London Borough of Camden in London, actually consulting directly with people with dementia. And as a practice, we would go into care homes and talk to people for 24 or 48 hours to try to understand how they understood, how they experienced the world. Very often, I would ask someone about the room next door, and they would describe it to me in great detail. And then I'd realize that the room next door had Bob and the two boys, and it was 40 years ago, and it was somewhere else altogether. But if you allow yourself to say that's normal, then you understand extraordinary things about how people are constructing their reality. In our single-story building, I asked a woman why she was always wandering, and she said she was looking for the stairs. And I said, there were no stairs in the building. I said, why are you looking for the stairs? And she said, all my things are upstairs. So that sense of wandering, looking for yourself. But what we did was we took seriously the idea that you could talk to people with dementia about their concerns. And here we are measuring out the space standards of their bedroom and seeing how they can use it in the most efficient way possible, right down to every single detail, and trying to understand what it was that they wanted. The nicest part of the project was we asked each person with dementia to make us a postcard, which was a photograph from their own home, and to address it to Dear Architect. And some people said they wanted more light or they wanted more color. But other people disclosed really profound things about themselves, really deep things about their distress and their position in the world. It was an extremely interesting exercise for us. And at the end of it, we produced a document called What You Told Us. It had nothing other than what they told us in it, but it was intended to put their ideas into a form that would be legible and that we could pass on to other architects. Two key things about that, two of my other lessons. If you have dementia, the longer you remain at home, the better. Specialized care environments are not ideal for dementia. The best thing is to be at home with the people who you love. The second thing is all architects should design cities for people with dementia. It shouldn't be about the old folks' home. It should be about the theatre and the train station, the filling station, the supermarket. It should be about public transport and allowing people with dementia to move around the city. But also there were things which were just about shared internal living and coziness and colour. And the garden we've drawn here has got every single suggestion that everybody made for a garden. I could hardly call it a design. It's probably the most jumble garden you'll ever see, but it's full of good ideas. This led me to think a little bit about the more fundamental thoughts about what it is to be in the world, what it is that we have that people with dementia are losing, and what that tells us about ourselves. The idea of our ability to place ourselves in space. And I became very interested in these drawings by Paul Klee, which show the predicament of an ordinary person making their way through the day. For people with dementia, the loss of that comes with a profound loss of self and with a loss of their own individual identity. And we began to think about how a caring community, how the people around you, whether they're family or neighbors or professional carers, could help you to reconstruct that sense of yourself. On the basis of that, we were asked to do a piece for the Venice Biennale as the Irish representatives. And we did two things, an installation and a website. The website is called Losing Myself, and you can still access it. It's full of stories and dialogues about dementia, told by people with dementia, and talking to experts about what dementia is. And I'm going to just take you through some parts of it first of all. Working with a website designer, dealing with people with dementia, the first thing we had to work out was how the navigation of the website itself would work. And it was fascinating to see which of these emblems became confusing and which of them became legible for people with dementia. It wasn't at all obvious to me which ones they would understand and which ones they would not. But we tried to make the navigation of the website as simple as possible. It talks about what it is to have dementia and suggests that we can explore the subject much more deeply so that we're in an interdisciplinary way so that we can produce an understanding of it. I was going to play you some audio pieces, but they're not very legible in this room. If I had played this particular dialogue, you would hear a woman with dementia telling you about the day that she discovered she had dementia and went in and resigned from her job and how she felt about that. Her loss of herself, her loss of her vocation, her loss of what it was to be in the world. She speaks amazingly clearly about the experience of having dementia. In the next one, Sebastian Crutch, who's an eminent neuropsychologist, talks about what happens to the brain. And he says an amazing thing, which is that people with dementia sometimes seem to be crazy or irrational or behaving oddly. But if your brain was experiencing what their brain is, that's exactly what you'd be experiencing too, that they're actually applying incredible intelligence to hold the fragments of their brain function together. And finally, we had simple stories which were from family members and people who knew people with dementia, trying to understand the issue of dementia. Just little anecdotes. Everybody always has an anecdote about an aunt or uncle or friend or partner who had dementia, helping us to understand it through stories. One complex thing we did was to speak to neuroscientists, and as a teacher at UCL, I was lucky to share with the neuroscientists who recently won the Nobel Prize for discovering the parts of our brains that understand space. If you just pause for a minute and think about this, because I think it's an amazing thing that none of us know. When you walk into this tent, your brain lays down a grid right over the tent. It's at 7 degrees to the long axis of the tent, and every time you cross a node point in that grid, a cell in your brain fires. The chair you're sitting in is now associated with a place cell, which will fire every time you go back to that position. If I built an office block on this site, and you came back at night time 20 years later and went into the office block in the dark with no sensory clues around you, the exact point where you're sitting in your chair would fire that exact place cell. There's a miracle happening in our brains every second, which is the way in which this tells us where we are. And what the neuroscientists are also telling us is that exact function which tells you where you are in time is also the thing that lays down your memories. And if you damage one part of it, you damage your memories. So the place we are in time, our memory, and the place we are in space, our navigation, has got cells which function to locate ourselves all the time in that. And that's what allows us to feel at ease in the world, and that's what people with dementia lose. We want to look at the work of this artist who died of dementia, and he made a project for himself, which we discussed with his wife, which is paintings which were regularly done through the course of his disease, trying to paint his own predicament, trying to paint his relationship with the people around him and the spaces that he knew and loved. Eventually the drawings just dissolve away into something you can't understand at all. We went to the Venice Biennale and found this amazing old industrial shed and said we were going to make a drawing on the floor. The drawing would be a time-based projection of the plan of the building so that architects could see an architect's plan drawing through the experiences of those who use their building rather than through the intentions of the architect. And the first sketch is suggesting we would put a grid of projectors shining an image down onto the floor. People could wander around the edge of that, and the factory is full of the remnants of the old naval shipyard that it used to be in the Arsenale in Venice. And we would make the idea that the plan of the building was something that would be expressed over time. We set up a workshop in our studio and began to think about how we would draw the experiences of people with dementia. And we went through an experimental drawing project that lasted for about 6 months, looking at the way in which all the different layers of information about how we experience the world could be laid down in a plan. We made lots and lots of experiments. One idea that we came up with that was central was that if we drew on the back of a sheet of white glass, you could see the activity of drawing being filmed through the glass. And so we would say that the person who's drawing could in an imaginary way be a person with dementia who's trying to construct the world around them, and that the act of drawing is like the act of apprehension. And so we thought of this idea of the floor of the Biennale having multiple people making drawings onto it as a projection. All of these sketches were done to try to understand how you would experience a building in time. And the key thing that we decided to do was to take the plan of the building and to make a drawing which was time-based through 24 hours. So each of these rectangles is a sheet of paper, and there are 24 time slots and 64 sheets of paper. So we had to make something like 1,500 drawings showing how the whole building worked through a 24-hour cycle from dawn till dawn. And while we were at it, we decided that the building would also go through, morning would be springtime, lunchtime would be summer, afternoon would be autumn, and nighttime would be winter. So we see the building moving through the cycle of time. And we elected 16 draftsmen, each of which would represent one person with dementia. We made these special tables to film the drawings that we were making, the glass tabletops with a little camera at the bottom, so you could film the draftsman making the drawing. And for 3 months, we had great fun in our drawing studio. This is a Japanese woman with the images of her father and her grandfather who had dementia, trying to draw him. The drawing she's making, he's waking up in bed in the morning and trying to apprehend the room bit by bit, because he has to build up all of those memories of the room again when he wakes up. She's naturally being filmed from the underside as she draws. And so what happens is that when you have a group of people doing this, that you get the drawing being made perhaps in 16 different places, and the hands appear to be drawing as if from the underside of the floor. Sometimes a person is by themselves, but often we find them in a social situation, and we need multiple people making the same drawing as we film it. Here we have people dining in eating breakfast in the dining room, and you can see they're out here gardening in the raised planters. It was fantastic fun doing these drawings, because you would have to do it as a kind of performance and work together to make a drawing out of it. And bit by bit, we made a larger plan of the building. This is my collaborative partner, Georgia Manalapoulou, who teaches at UCL. The pair of us worked together. We would lay these drawings out on the floor of the studio and try and make something coherent out of it. Here we are once again in the dining room, 4 of us together, sharing a table over lunch, trying to draw the experience of eating lunch and to sort of create the world. The idea of this is that while lunch is being made and the drawing is being created, the other spaces which we've just left are dissolving away because we can't hold them in our memory. And so the plan of the building becomes not the thing that the architect makes, which you can see all at once. It becomes the thing that the person with dementia experiences, where you're trying to hold that little bit of the building in your head for long enough to understand it before the bits on each side begin to fall away. And these drawings became more and more complex as they involved more people. This is the drawing of the dining room, which we saw being made a moment ago, and you can see after half an hour of people having a meal, you can begin to sense them moving around the space to their tables, getting up and getting stuff from the counter and eating their lunch. One key activity in the Dementia Centre which we built is Irish dancing, which they have every afternoon. So this is one of my Irish colleagues teaching a Japanese girl how to do Irish dancing before they make the drawing, which looks a little bit like this. You can see the piano in the bottom left-hand side. Of course, the still drawing that you see has got nothing to do with the projection, because the projection is always being drawn in real time. So we built up a file of 1,500 drawings which were used for the animation. And we collated them together to make this huge piece on the floor, which was about a third of the size of this tent, I would say. And the idea of this, it would take you through the full 24-hour cycle. And you can see here how we tried to bring the seasons in through layering and drawing. The audiovisual people who we worked with said it was the biggest file they had ever worked with in their careers. It was absolutely enormous file that was required to make this. And now what I'm going to do is just show you a sense of what it's like. You can see that the colored toned areas relate to the grid cells that we lay down. You can see the garden around the edge of the image, and you can see all of the hands drawing the space as people inhabit those rooms. Here it is in its nighttime mode. You can see that night has fallen on the scene. One thing about this was we made a sound landscape for the project so that there were 56 speakers in the room, and from somebody quietly whispering to an older person that it was time for them to get up, or somebody asking a small question in one corner of the drawing. On other parts, the whole drawing would be consumed by a rain shower, or in Ireland, they still have the bells of the Angelus. And we had radio programs, television programs, commentaries from old football matches. So the thing came with a whole sound landscape of its own. In order to project it onto the floor, we had to use this array of projectors in the Arsenale, and they had to be held on tripods off the floor. And you can see what this was like, the old timber structure of the Arsenale, and all of the data and sound video stream coming down from the ceiling to create this illusion of a sound landscape and a projected video landscape. And this is the installation itself within the great shed of the Arsenale. The tripods are a bit taller than a person standing. And then with the projection turned on, you get some sense of what it looks like. So bear in mind that you're being taken through the building just very slowly through the day, that each of these drawings is being made. On the left-hand side there, on the bottom left, you can see the bus has just arrived and people are piling out of the bus. The trees in the garden begin to develop through the seasons. This is the nighttime image with it bluer. And you can see the sense of it being drawn, the blank spaces that are falling away and the other ones that are being filled in. And here's the full drawing just at 6 p.m. when all of the spaces are active, and you can see the whole plan of the building emerge for just a moment. The seasons are changing in the garden all the time. This is looking down from above just after dusk when there's a rainstorm and the whole thing goes a very, very pale blue. The purpose of this is to try to understand what people with dementia are experiencing. And beside this, what you might call art installation, there was a very simple poster that had the 16 lessons. All architects must understand dementia. It's not just for specialists. People with dementia are best kept at home. That's where they're happiest and where their physical memory at home is most complete. Older people, as they get towards the end of their lives, tend to be managed to manage out risk. But actually the most important thing about the end of your life is a spiritually meaningful death. To take liberty away from old people in the name of their safety is to rob them of their basic identity. And it's a major challenge for all of us to think about how we allow people freedom at the high care end of their lives, up to the very end of their lives. When you design buildings for people with dementia, you must make a daisy chain, a series of interesting objects they can move between that they're likely to remember. A clock, a goldfish bowl, a bird cage, a view, something that they'll remember when they come back to it again. When we design for dementia, we should consider the city. The city is the most important place for people, and they should be allowed out into the city. My friend, whose father has dementia, lives in a small town in England. And when he goes to the local pub for lunch, the first thing the barman does is to ring up the rival bar down the road and ask if he's had lunch in that one. And so they work together as a community to allow him autonomy to have his lunch by himself. Care for dementia is about connections. It's about avoiding isolation. It's about thinking about even care homes being connected to the city. The care home in Camden that I went to, the sitting room was empty, but the little window where they could watch the children smoking at the back of the school was absolutely packed with older people, because what's better than watching teenagers flirting? Our society, the modernization of our society sacrifices individual liberty for collective community. And as that individual liberty falls away, difficult decisions occur at the high end of our lives. We need to think about them much more carefully. For you, I think it's important to say that we should embrace technology. I was looking at the wonderful floor you have in your hospital room, the intelligent vinyl floor. But there are lots and lots of other ways in which technology can help people with dementia. Simple design changes to people's homes can greatly lengthen the time that they spend at home rather than in institutional care. Glass fronts on the cupboards, a little box where your kettle and your coffee and your 3 or 4 familiar objects are always very obvious on the counter. Really simple things. When you're designing for people with dementia, you must avoid physical and visual barriers at all costs. They should be able to roam freely all the time, or they lose their orientation and become very distressed. Conceptually, I think that architects need to learn more from other disciplines, and one part of this project is to say that we've spoken to anthropologists, neuroscientists, care workers, the families of people with dementia, doctors, psychologists, to understand the broad range of issues so that we can properly design for people who we can't fully talk to. And in doing that, we expand our ways of drawing, which is what we've done in this project here, to say it's possible for architects to draw their buildings not as though they are architectural objects, but as though they are things that we live in, and that what you do is you draw the life and not the object. A building is only ever a frame for somebody's life. And finally, the purpose of life is the most important thing. And as we come to the end of our lives, however difficult it is, however strange the behavior is with people with dementia, as a society, we owe it to these people to allow them to live and to end their lives in a meaningful way. Thank you very much.